Imagine moving to a quiet neighborhood to retire in peace, only to find out it's run by a group of cosplay cops pretending they're the law. Yeah. That happened to me. After 30 years in law enforcement, including 15 as the state police chief, I thought I'd seen it all. I'd taken down cartels, handled hostage situations, testified in federal court. But nothing prepared me for a bunch of middle-aged men in matching polos trying to arrest me for parking my own truck in my own driveway. It all started the week I moved into Sycamore Hills. Charming place. Tree-lined streets, friendly neighbors, decent property prices. I bought a modest ranch-style house at the edge of the community, hoping for a little solitude and a break from chaos. What I got instead was Martin Delaney and his self-appointed army of HOA officers. They called themselves the Sycamore Hills Enforcement Patrol, but in reality, it was just 3 guys in cargo pants, aviators, and fake gold badges they probably ordered online. They carried clipboards like they were writing up narcotics busts and talked into dollar store walkie-talkies as if they were coordinating SWAT raids. I met them on day 3. I had just finished unpacking boxes in my garage when I heard a sharp tap-tap-tap on my driver's side window. I looked up to see a round man with a sunburnt face and mirrored sunglasses glaring at me. "You can't leave that truck there overnight," he said. I blinked. "It's my driveway. It's still a violation. Article 4, Section B, work vehicles must be stored out of public view." I stared at him for a moment, genuinely unsure if this was a prank. My truck was a plain gray Ram 1500. No decals. No tools in the bed. Nothing commercial. "You're kidding," I said. He wasn't. The next morning, I woke up to a bright red citation taped to my windshield, and a $200 fine. That's when I realized this wasn't a neighborhood. It was a petty kingdom, and I had just stepped into the middle of a delusional dictatorship. And trust me, these guys? They had no idea who they were messing with. Comment 1 if you've ever had to deal with a crazy HOA rule. I'll admit, at first I laughed. Not out loud, but the kind of low, disbelieving chuckle you let out when someone tells you gravity doesn't apply to them. I mean, really? $200 for parking my own truck in my own driveway? I peeled the bright red citation off the windshield and looked it over. It was printed on glossy cardstock like some twisted Hallmark greeting card. "Notice of violation, Sycamore Hills Enforcement Patrol," was stamped at the top, with a fake seal that tried very hard to look like a sheriff's badge. It included a list of infractions, most of which read like nonsense. Obstruction of community aesthetics. Unauthorized work vehicle placement. Refusal to comply with initial verbal directive. What kind of HOA writes like they're pressing criminal charges? I flipped it over. At the bottom in bold. Failure to pay within 10 days will result in further enforcement action, including possible vehicle removal. That was the moment I stopped laughing. These weren't just petty neighbors with clipboards. This was something else, something performative and dangerous. I'd seen it before in backwater towns, little groups of men obsessed with power, inventing rules to feel important. Most of the time, they just stayed in their basements, yelling at the news. But every now and then, one of them put on a badge and tried to become a dictator. And these 3? They weren't just trying. They thought they already were. Later that afternoon, I decided to walk the neighborhood, get a feel for the place. I passed a few homes with American flags, some kids riding scooters. Looked normal enough, until I saw Clipboard Guy. He was standing in front of an older couple's house, arguing over a bird feeder. "No, ma'am," he said, tapping his pen aggressively. "You were told sunflower seeds attract squirrels. That's a $50 warning." The woman, easily in her 70s, looked like she was on the verge of tears. Her husband stood by, fists clenched, saying nothing. I stepped in. "Everything okay here?" Clipboard Guy turned, eyes narrowing when he saw me. "This doesn't concern you, ma'am." "Oh, I think it might," I said, tilting my head toward the couple. He hesitated for half a second, then made a show of clicking his pen and walking off. "You've been warned," he called back to them. The older woman looked at me and whispered, We tried to fight them once. They doubled the fines. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about order. It was about control. They were running a shakedown, and I had just become their next target. Only this time, they picked the wrong house. By the next morning, I knew they weren't going to back off. I'd left the citation untouched, still sitting on my kitchen table next to a cold mug of coffee. I wasn't about to entertain their fantasy authority by paying anything, but I also knew the type. Men like this didn't take silence as indifference. They took it as a challenge. Sure enough, at 8:12 a.m., I spotted them through the front window, the patrol. Jerry, clipboard guy, and Ray, beer belly, were pacing on the sidewalk across from my driveway, walkie-talkies in hand like they were coordinating a hostage rescue. They kept glancing at my truck, whispering, nodding, posturing. I knew the dance. This wasn't neighborhood watch. This was ego theater. Then I heard it, the low growl of a diesel engine. A battered tow truck turned the corner, lurching its way down Sycamore Lane. I watched it creep along like a vulture, its driver looking vaguely confused as he slowed in front of my house. Jerry waved him over with both arms like he was guiding in an airplane on the tarmac. Ray stepped into my yard like he owned the place. That was enough. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and calmly walked down the front steps. "Morning," I said casually. Jerry turned, clearly caught off guard. "Ma'am, we've issued multiple citations. You were warned. Your vehicle is in violation of community code and is subject to removal." The tow truck driver, a guy in his 20s with a neck tattoo and the expression of someone who did not want to be here, looked between us nervously. I smiled at him. "Hey, before you touch anything, I'd suggest calling the sheriff's office." Jerry scoffed. "That won't be necessary." "Oh," I said, tilting my head. "But it is. Because what you're doing right now." I nodded toward the truck. "That's attempted theft of private property. And I'd love to see how that holds up, especially since I am the sheriff." Their faces froze. Ray blinked. "You what?" I reached into my back pocket and slowly flipped open a leather case. "Cassandra Barnes," I said, holding up the badge. "Former state police chief. And unless you have a warrant signed by a judge, touching that truck is going to end very badly, for all of you." The driver raised both hands and started backing his truck away. "Nope. I'm out," he muttered, throwing it in reverse. Jerry looked like he was trying to compute calculus without a calculator. You can't just ignore HOA bylaws." "Oh, I can," I said flatly, stepping forward. "And I will. Because you're not law enforcement. You're not even legitimate. You're a couple of cosplay cops with printer paper and ego problems." Ray took a step back, the blood draining from his face. I lowered my voice just enough to make the message crystal clear. "If you ever trespass on my property again, I'll have you arrested for impersonating a peace officer, harassment, and attempted theft. And that's just for starters." Jerry opened his mouth to argue, then thought better of it. "Right," I said, taking a sip of my coffee. "Glad we had this talk." And with that, I turned around and walked back inside. But I knew it wasn't over. Guys like that? They always double down. For the next 2 days, things went quiet. Almost too quiet. No walkie-talkie chatter outside my window. No strange men lurking near my hedges with clipboards. The neighborhood looked normal. Kids played hopscotch. Lawn mowers hummed. It felt like the tension had snapped back into place, stretched tight but hidden beneath the surface. But I knew better. When men like Jerry and Ray get embarrassed, especially in public, they don't retreat. They reload. So I decided to issue one last, clear warning before things got ugly. I printed out copies of the state statute on impersonating a law enforcement officer, highlighted the penalties in yellow, and walked them right up to their little HOA Patrol Command Post, a repurposed garden shed at the end of the cul-de-sac with a cheap metal sign reading, "Authorized personnel only." Ray was inside, sipping from a mug that said, "HOA Strong." He froze when I stepped through the open door. I dropped the paper on the table in front of him. Just some light reading, I said. I figured since you all love rules so much, you'd enjoy a real one. He looked down at the highlighted text, then back at me. His cheeks flushed red, but he didn't say a word. You wear a badge, I continued. You give out citations, you try to tow someone's property, and you call it enforcement? That's impersonation, Ray. That's a felony. Still nothing. I leaned in just slightly. This is your one chance to walk away. Quietly. I don't want to make an example out of you. He gave me a stiff nod. We'll talk to Martin, he muttered. Good, I said, turning to leave. Tell him the sheriff says hi. For a moment I let myself believe that might be the end of it. It wasn't. Because a few days later, I got an invitation. A folded flyer slid under my door. Mandatory HOA meeting, attendance required. Violators subject to review. Cute. They were about to try something big. And I was ready. The flyer was printed in bold Comic Sans, like a bake sale announcement from 1998. Mandatory HOA meeting, Clubhouse, Thursday, 7 p.m. Attendance required. Violators subject to review and penalty. Penalty. Huh! I almost laughed. But I didn't throw it out. No, this time, I wanted to see what their little dictatorship looked like in the light of day. If they were stupid enough to push things further, I was going to give them enough rope to hang themselves. Thursday came fast. The community clubhouse sat at the center of Sycamore Hills, a repurposed tennis pavilion with folding chairs, beige walls, and the faint smell of old carpet cleaner. I showed up early and took a seat near the back, sunglasses tucked into my shirt collar, notebook in hand. The room slowly filled with residents, some looking curious, some annoyed, most just tired of the HOA circus. Near the front stood the self-anointed board, flanked by Jerry and Ray in matching navy polos. And dead center was Martin Delaney, president of the HOA, king of this fake castle. Martin had the slicked back hair of a game show host and the body language of a man who took himself way too seriously. He tapped the microphone like he was about to deliver a keynote at a tech conference. Good evening, residents, he began, adjusting his tie. We've called this emergency session to address a matter that threatens the stability and decorum of our community. Oh, here we go. He glanced around the room, then let his eyes lock on me for a little too long. Certain individuals, he said, have repeatedly violated Sycamore Hills standards. They have refused to comply with written citations. They have disrupted enforcement actions. They have disrespected the officers tasked with preserving order. Murmurs passed through the room. I stayed quiet. And so, Martin continued, puffing his chest, the board has voted unanimously to take corrective action. He gave a nod to Ray and Jerry. And that's when it happened. The two of them stepped forward, serious as a heart attack, with Jerry pulling plastic zip-tie cuffs from his pocket. We are hereby placing resident Cassie Barnes under citizen's arrest, he declared, for repeated violations of HOA code, obstruction, and disorderly conduct. The room went silent. No one moved. Then I laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a full, gut-deep burst of laughter that echoed off the clubhouse walls. Jerry froze mid-step, his hands still holding the zip ties like he wasn't sure whether to use them or throw them away. Martin's face flushed red. This is not a joke, Ms. Barnes. Oh, it's definitely a joke, I said, standing slowly. And congratulations, you're the punchline. Stand up, Jerry said, regaining a bit of courage. Don't resist. I stepped forward, pulled out my badge, and raised my voice just enough for every homeowner in the room to hear. Cassie Barnes, retired chief of the state police. And unless you boys want to add felony impersonation and attempted false imprisonment to your little game, I'd suggest you back off. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ray took a full step backward. Jerry blinked like he'd been smacked in the forehead. Martin opened his mouth, but nothing came out. You can't, this is a private meeting, he tried. And this is a public crime, I said flatly. I turned to face the room. Let's be clear. These men are not officers. They are not authorized to enforce anything. And what just happened here? That's not a citizen's arrest. It's a public display of delusion. Whispers turned to murmurs. Someone near the front clapped once, then stopped. Martin tried one last time. You have no legal standing here. I have a badge, I said, and a folder full of complaints from residents you've extorted, threatened, and bullied. Then I pulled out my phone. And I've also got recordings from your previous meetings. The ones you idiots uploaded to your public Google Drive. I tapped play. Martin's voice came on loud and clear. If we don't do something about Barnes, the others might start pushing back. It's only illegal if she calls the real cops. Jerry's voice chimed in. Exactly, Martin said. And she won't. We control the neighborhood. The crowd erupted. This time, it wasn't murmurs. It was rage. The silence broke like glass. Whispers turned to full-blown outrage. One man near the front row stood up, arms folded, shaking his head in disbelief. A woman in the back clutched her purse like she was suddenly realizing she'd been robbed, and in a way, she had. Martin tried to regain control, stepping forward and tapping the mic again. That recording is taken out of context. No, I said, my voice slicing through his denial. What's out of context is the idea that you have any authority to govern this community through threats and lies. I held up a stack of manila folders and raised my voice so everyone could hear. Do you know how many complaints I've received since moving here? Over a dozen. Handwritten letters. Emails. Photos. Some of you here tonight trusted me enough to come forward, and I'm grateful. I walked to the front and placed the folders on the table in front of Martin, who visibly flinched as if I'd slammed down a loaded weapon. I opened one and held it up. Here's a statement from Mrs. Abigail Collins. She was fined $300 for planting tulips that were, quote, not native to the Sycamore Hills color scheme. You threatened to place a lien on her home. Abigail stood up near the back. That's true, she said. I paid it. I didn't know what else to do. More murmurs. A few gasps. I opened another. Mr. Harold Kim. Fined $450 for leaving a work boot on the porch. And when he refused to pay, you sent a letter threatening legal action and possible eviction. Harold stood too. They told me they had lawyers. He growled. I didn't realize it was all fake. It wasn't just 2 or 3 victims. It was an entire wall of paper, filled with stories of bullying, invented violations, and scare tactics. They'd built an empire of fear, and it was crumbling right in front of them. Everything you've done, I continued, turning back to Martin, was under false pretenses. You presented yourselves as law enforcement. You created fake citations. You threatened homeowners with fabricated legal consequences, and collected thousands of dollars in the process. Martin's face had gone pale. Jerry looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. Ray was now standing stiffly in the corner, arms crossed but clearly defeated. This isn't just unethical, I said. It's criminal. Should fake HOA officers face real jail time? Type yes or no in the comments. I tapped my phone again. And if you're wondering whether your little HOA operation left a paper trail, it did. You recorded yourselves conspiring, uploaded it to public access, and even drafted fake legal notices using letterhead you designed in Microsoft Word. A man near the door laughed under his breath. Busted. I turned toward the crowd. You've all been victims of fraud. But it's not too late. If any of you have been fined, threatened, or forced to pay out, document it. Come talk to me. You have options. Martin opened his mouth. You don't have jurisdiction over the HOA. Oh, I said, stepping closer. But the State Attorney General's office does. And thanks to your arrogance, they're already involved. I let that hang in the air. The room had shifted. No longer a captive audience, the residents were now a jury. Martin looked around and saw what I already knew. He had lost the room. And very soon, he'd lose a lot more. Martin's mouth opened, maybe to deny, maybe to plead, but before a single syllable came out, the double doors at the back of the clubhouse swung open with a thud. 3 uniformed deputies stepped inside, their presence cutting through the tension like a scalpel. The room collectively inhaled. The lead deputy, Officer Ramirez, a sharp, composed woman with a clipboard of her own, scanned the room calmly, then nodded when her eyes landed on me. "Ms. Barnes," she said, "we received your report and accompanying evidence. Per directive from the state attorney's office, we're executing a lawful seizure of all materials related to HOA activity here at Sycamore Hills, pending investigation into fraud, impersonation of law enforcement, and financial coercion." Gasps rippled across the rows of residents. Martin staggered back a half step. "This is outrageous. This is a community matter." "No, sir," Ramirez said, cutting him off coldly. "This is now a criminal matter. And we take impersonation of law enforcement very seriously." She nodded to the 2 deputies behind her. One made a beeline for the HOA's folding table, flipping open their ledgers and portable filing boxes. The other turned directly toward Jerry and Ray. "Let me see that badge," the deputy said, nodding toward Jerry's chest. Jerry hesitated, then slowly unclipped the metal emblem from his shirt and handed it over. The deputy turned it over in his palm, then gave a short laugh. "You ordered this online, didn't you?" Jerry swallowed. "It was for community structure. That's all." "Uh-huh." The deputy looked unimpressed. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." "What?" "You can't." Click. The cuffs went on fast. Jerry didn't even fight it. Ray didn't wait. He raised his hands before anyone asked. "I didn't know it was illegal," he stammered. "Martin told us it was all covered." The second deputy moved in and cuffed him just as quickly. Phones came out across the room. Neighbors recorded with wide eyes as the 2 officers were marched out the door like con men caught mid-scam. Martin stood alone now, sweating through his collar, still trying to look in control. "You have no proof I did anything personally," he snapped. I stepped beside Ramirez and handed her a USB drive. Backup of the recordings, including the one where Martin outlines how to make it look official enough to scare them. She raised an eyebrow. "That'll do." Ramirez turned to Martin. "Gregory Delaney, you're not under arrest yet, but you are required to turn over all financial documents associated with the Sycamore Hills HOA. Any resistance will be considered obstruction." Martin looked around the room. No allies. No security squad. No power. He didn't say a word as he slumped into a chair, defeated. And just like that, the paper crown slipped off his head. For a few tense minutes, Martin stayed slumped in that chair, silent, sweating, his jaw twitching as the deputies gathered documents, laptops, a shoebox filled with printed violation notices, and one suspicious-looking ledger full of cash deposit slips. Then Officer Ramirez turned back to him, holding a slim black binder. "Mr. Delaney," she said evenly, "you listed this binder in your HOA filings as Neighborhood Beautification Fund." Martin blinked. "Yes. For landscaping and seasonal decor." She flipped it open and pulled out a receipt. A weekend at the Lake Tahoe Resort for $1,842.19, charged to HOA funds. The room murmured again, louder this time. Ramirez's voice dropped an octave. "Care to explain that?" Martin stood abruptly, eyes wild. "This is a setup. She did this. She turned everyone against me." He pointed a trembling finger at me. "She's not even part of this HOA. She's an outsider." "I'm a homeowner," I said simply. "Just like everyone here. Except I didn't use fake authority to rob my neighbors." Ramirez had heard enough. "Gregory Delaney," she said, pulling out a pair of cuffs, "you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to impersonate a public official." "No! No, this isn't happening!" Martin shouted as she stepped forward. But it was. The room watched in stunned silence as the man who once barked orders at garden clubs and fined people for the color of their mailbox was cuffed and led away like the criminal he truly was. A few people clapped. Others simply exhaled. The illusion had shattered, and behind it was nothing but a coward in a borrowed tie. By the following week, Sycamore Hills HOA was dissolved by emergency court order. The funds were frozen. The fake citations voided. All liens dropped. The HOA, once a looming shadow over every fence and flower bed, ceased to exist overnight. And the residents? They didn't just get their money back. They got their freedom back. It wasn't perfect. There were still disputes to settle, trust to rebuild. But for the first time in years, they could walk outside without wondering if a fake cop would measure their lawn height. The tyrant was gone. The walls had fallen. And the neighborhood was finally ready to breathe again. 3 weeks after the collapse of the HOA, Sycamore Hills looked lighter. I don't mean the landscaping, though the fake compliance signs had all been torn down and a few of the ridiculous yard height measurement poles had mysteriously disappeared overnight. I mean the people. Neighbors waved to each other again. Kids played hopscotch in the cul-de-sac without being warned about unsupervised activity. And no one was writing citations about bird feeders or mailbox colors. The first Saturday of the month, we held a community meeting, not an HOA meeting, just a gathering of residents. This time, it wasn't in the clubhouse under flickering fluorescent lights and passive-aggressive banners about decorum. We met on someone's front lawn. Folding chairs, lemonade, homemade cookies. And for the first time, people weren't afraid to speak up. That day, the neighborhood voted to form a resident advisory board, not an HOA. No power to fine, no fake officers, no clipboards. Just volunteers helping organize events, mediate small disputes, and make sure no one slipped through the cracks. They asked me to sit in as an advisor. I said yes on one condition. No uniforms, I said. And absolutely no badges. They laughed. The kind of laugh that tells you the fear has finally faded. Over the next few weeks, we built something real. Someone organized a block party. Another neighbor started a community garden in the unused lot where Martin once tried to install a surveillance camera. I even got a handwritten thank you note from Abigail Collins, the woman with the tulips. You gave us our neighborhood back. It read. Not just the lawns and the driveways, but the trust. I kept that note. Framed it even. Not because I needed the praise, but because it reminded me that sometimes, the worst kind of tyranny doesn't come from government buildings or courthouses. It comes from the neighbor with a clipboard and too much free time. And the best way to beat it? Shine a light. And let the whole neighborhood see what was hiding in the shadows. If you think Cassie did the right thing, hit the like button and comment justice served. At the end of the day, this wasn't just about phony fines or a fake badge. It was about power, fear, and what happens when good people are too intimidated to push back. What this neighborhood went through isn't unique. Across the country, there are countless communities where authority gets twisted into control, where people abuse titles to bully rather than serve. Whether it's a fake HOA or a real one run by the wrong people, the lesson is the same: never hand over your voice out of convenience. Rules should serve people, not the other way around. And justice? Sometimes it doesn't come from a courtroom. Sometimes it starts with a neighbor who simply says, enough. We all want peace and order, but not at the cost of dignity, freedom, or common sense. So if you ever feel something is wrong in your community, don't wait for someone else to fix it. Speak up. Ask questions. Demand transparency. Because a healthy neighborhood isn't defined by perfect lawns or mailbox heights. It's defined by respect. And that starts with people brave enough to stand for what's right, even when they stand alone.